Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. Do you know what else I like? I like a bit of stats. So what we're going to have a little look at... No, stats are not boring. Stats are fun. What's wrong with you? What we're going to have a little look at is what are the chances of Boris Johnson winning a majority in the, well, what is almost certainly an upcoming general election, given that Jeremy Corbyn is still confirming that as soon as we've got our extension in place for the Brexit period, that he is going to support a general election. But before that, if you find yourself enjoying the video, and what's not to enjoy, we've got stats and politics, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So I'm going to do this in 3 bits here. We're going to have a look at some polls for voting intentions, some stats from the actual polls, the last 4 general elections, to see what we can read into these, as well as a little look about how the major party leaders, Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson, face off against each other in the public's view. So, first of all, we can see here, this is what a lot of people are quite downbeat about, unless you're a Conservative, in which case I suppose you're fairly upbeat, but downbeat at the same time. So this is the poll track. It goes back quite a long time. You can see that the Conservatives are riding high, and they have been for some time, ever since really like spring this year. The Brexit Party in the polls were doing pretty well then, but that's because the elections were all about the European elections. Liberal Democrats and Brexit Party doing very well because they both had a clear Brexit position. The Conservatives, it was less clear but also more chaotic, and Labour's position has been a right mess for some time. And Brexit, I haven't put that tracker up there, but Brexit is the most important issue that anyone has. Not necessarily against all the others added up, but the single most important issue. So this is what a lot of people are looking at, and they're going, oh yeah, this is why Boris Johnson wants the general election. He may not want a general election because he thinks he can get a majority, or more specifically, his advisors, his strategists, may not think they can get a majority. It looks dubious at the moment. Not completely impossible. There's no point in being blary about it, but it does look dubious. Now, it could just be desperation. At the moment, Boris Johnson is Prime Minister, and the opposition are not getting behind anyone to replace him, so he's sort of secure as Prime Minister. But the next general election isn't due to come around until 2022. He can't carry on as he is now because he can't get legislation through reliably. It's a massive struggle, as he keeps finding out. So it may just be a case of, well, he might get a majority in a general election, so why not go for it? It's better than the situation he's got now. So let's have a little look, if I close that annoying window down, at the stats. Been busy in Excel here. So the last general election, the Conservatives got 42.4% share of the vote, which is significantly more than they're getting at the moment in the polls. Now, I will have to point out in polls, remember, those are the polls as they are now. Once a general election is triggered, we're into full-on campaigning. Things can change then, and things can change there right up until the last minute. And this poll data at the moment is only an indicator of what people feel now. It can all be changed. Otherwise, people wouldn't campaign. But just to point out the issue of the first past the post system, you cannot look at polls and go, oh, well, the Conservatives are way ahead of anyone else, therefore they're going to win a majority. Doesn't work like that. So look at the Conservatives. 2017 won 42.4% share of the vote, but got 49% of the seats. Compare that with Labour, 40% of the vote. So they got fewer votes in the country at large, but only slightly fewer. But their share of the vote was way smaller than the Conservatives, just indicating that you cannot translate share of the vote at all into how many seats. So anyone trying to claim that they've seen polls that say, you know, when you see these polls, oh, this poll says the Conservatives could gain 15 seats or lose 20 seats or something like that. Absolute nonsense. The only way you could do that is to poll each individual constituency, which would be possible, but people tend not to do that. Sometimes they poll one when there's a by-election coming up. They tend not to do all 650 constituencies at once. This tends to be just a national thing. Now in 2015, and this is where it can be a bit worrying, their share of the vote was 36.9%, round about what it is sort of polling now. And they did get a majority, a very small majority. You can see just 51% of seats, 331 there. It is a majority. And that's what they could be thinking. So I often say, oh, he's not got enough of a vote share, but that could increase with a successful and, in their case, dirty electoral campaign. It is a serious worry. He could actually get a majority. This is why Jeremy Corbyn is mad to give him what he wants. But he is giving him what he wants, so let's carry on. 2010, which is when David Cameron first formed a government, they got 36.1%, but they did not get a majority of the seats. But it was only just shy of a majority. They got 307, which is about 47%. Now, this is where it looks interesting. So the general election before that is when Labour won it. So you'll notice 2017, 15 and 10, the Conservatives got a larger share of the seats than they did share of the vote. Not so in 2005. They got 35.7% vote share, but only a quarter of the seats. You'll notice they got a larger vote share than Labour did. Labour in 2005 got 35.4% of the vote, but a whopping 405 seats. That's massive, by the way. That is a hefty majority. So they got 62.3%. And it was billed as a really good election win, historic election win for Labour, third in a row. 62% of the seats, but they got a smaller vote share than the Conservatives. And this is the thing about first past the post. It's a bit of a nonsense, really, isn't it? But that's the situation. So what you could read from the last 4 years, I mean, you'd have to go much further before you can say it definitively, is that whoever ends up being the largest party seems to be getting a larger share of the seats than they are vote share. And what that suggests is that their strategists, their political strategists, are better at targeting individual constituency. What are those marginal constituencies? What can we do to pump our resources into those small number of constituencies that can make a big difference on polling day? Because your overall vote share isn't necessarily going to increase with these sort of campaigns. You're just pooling your resources into the places where it'll do the most good. And the parties that eventually form the government, it could be argued, are the ones who have the best election strategy. I don't know why I'm depressing myself like this. I really don't. And then I put in the Lib Dems and the SNP, the SNP doesn't really show anything other than the fact that politics has changed a bit very recently, because the SNP used to have a handful of seats and now they've got a significant number of seats. They are the third largest party in Parliament at the moment, which would have been a ridiculous notion 10 years ago, but there we are. So, but again, just to show vote share here, if you look at 2017, the Liberal Democrats got 7.4% of the vote and they got 12 seats. In 2015, when they got killed, they got 7.9% of the vote, which is more than they got 2 years later, but they got 8 seats, the fewest for some considerable time, possibly ever. Well, since they formed. So, yes, again, we cannot translate vote share into seat share, if you like. That is down to which party has got the best minds for focusing those resources. I'll leave it up to you to decide which you think that party is going to be. So then we come on to leaders. Now, I was talking to my girlfriend about this yesterday and she was saying, is it really fair that, we just look at the leader? Well, yes, it is, unfortunately, because the thing about democracy on this scale, it's not like voting a chair in a committee where you know everyone individually. You don't. You don't know these people. Very few people actually know Boris Johnson. It turns out the people who really do know him are the ones who hate him the most. Very few people actually know Jeremy Corbyn. Very few people actually knew Theresa May. In fact, Theresa May is the opposite of Boris Johnson. Apparently, if you know her, she's actually quite personable on that level. Doesn't come across, does it? So we do, unfortunately, have to look at the leaders. It's grim viewing for Labour again. I'm sorry, but, look away now if you're a fan of Corbyn. Actually, no, don't. We're going to have to face up to reality at some point. So we can see round about the general election that in 2017, Corbyn sneaked ahead of Theresa May. This is when everyone realised that Theresa May was the Maybot, the complete non-entity. The problem is that he didn't make it last. He didn't make it. It wasn't strong enough to carry the election, and because he only just sneaked ahead of her in terms of approval ratings. and then it went downhill from there. And since Boris Johnson's come in, you'll notice the thing about Theresa May is she doesn't have that charisma that is necessary for projecting confidence amongst millions of people who don't actually know you. Boris Johnson does, sad to say. Boris Johnson does. So he started off quite high, and if anything, it's got higher in terms of his... This is not so much an approval rating. This is more, who would you think is the best Prime Minister? Because this is ultimately what it is. I saw a comment today on my video saying, oh, Boris Johnson's really popular. No, he's not. I'll show you in a minute. He's really not popular. His approval ratings under normal circumstances would be poison. Absolute poison. The Conservatives would be hounding him out of the leadership. Toxic for a general election. But the thing is, it's a binary choice in this country. You know, people are looking, do we want as Prime Minister Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn? Not everyone votes in a general election according to who they want to be Prime Minister, but a hell of a lot do. And more are saying Boris Johnson. There's quite a lot are so conflicted they don't want to say either, but many more say Boris Johnson than Jeremy Corbyn. This is the unfortunate fact of the matter. So if we have a look at some more detailed little polls here, head-to-heads. So Jeremy Corbyn has a 23% positive opinion. So 23% of respondents say, yeah, I like Jeremy Corbyn. And this isn't necessarily as Prime Minister, but it is as a politician. 33% for Boris Johnson. Now, if you look at the negatives, 58% have a negative view of Jeremy Corbyn. 47% have a negative view of Boris Johnson. So you can see what I mean about the comparison. Boris Johnson, if you take out the neutrals there, the net effect is that there's minus 14% approval rating for Boris Johnson. That's terrible. The problem is it's minus 35 for Jeremy Corbyn. That's the issue there. Now I'm just going to show you a couple of other things, which actually, if you're a Labour supporter, could give you hope. But really, we need the strategists to get behind on this one. There's something missing here. So this is with Jeremy Corbyn. Now what we can see is he's got 34% approval rating from, I'm going to show it Boris Johnson's as well as a comparison. 34% positive opinion amongst millennials, which is still not very high for someone we want to carry us to the next election. But if you look at Boris Johnson, 26%, and that's his personal one. For the Conservatives, it's much lower. You can see that Jeremy Corbyn wins on millennials. Now, millennials are, of course, the ones who are only just going to be able to vote in this election. And this is why, as I was talking earlier on, Jeremy Corbyn should not support he shouldn't support a general election full stop on Boris Johnson's terms, but certainly not via the Fixed Terms Parliament Act. Because if he does, there will be some millennials who are just about old enough to vote, and he may get a bit of a boost from then. But look at the rest of it. Generation X, baby boom, that's me. Baby boomers, that's not me. Boris Johnson's killing Corbyn in these areas. Whereas, if he supports a general election via a bill that says, by the way, this time round we're going to have 16 and 17-year-olds vote, then you get more millennials voting. And that means Labour will get a larger boost. So will other parties, and sometimes those other parties are in competition with Labour, but ultimately Labour in competition with the Conservatives when it comes to forming a government. Are the strategists, if they've got any brains at all, one of the biggest ifs I've ever said, that is what they will pursue. If we must have a general election before a referendum, which is foolish, but if we must, then at least we need to get more millennials voting. And 16 to 17-year-olds have voted on polls in the UK before. There's no reason not to. They do in other countries in general elections. No reason not to in this country. Introduce a bill that says we'll do that. And it will get support. It will get support. And say to Boris Johnson, if you want your election, you support this motion. And then it can always be amended later. But again, the people who want the 16 to 17-year-olds to vote will support that. So anyway, that's how we can look at stats to have a nice little look at Boris Johnson's chances in a general election. What I would say is there is an outside chance. There is precedent for that sort of share in the vote, getting a majority. Anything can happen in an election campaign. He could increase his share of the vote, especially with some dirty electioneering, which I'm going to be talking about in a video tomorrow. I know there's some Corbynistas out there going, oh, no, it'll all be fine, it'll all be fine. Will it? Will it? But take it how you, take that how you will. Love to see your comments down below, and I hope you found the video interesting. If you have, and you'd like to support the channel further, then please click on the Patreon link for details, and until next time, I'll see you later.